All right. Ready to dive into something a little unexpected? We're tackling zoning laws today.
Okay.
But trust me, this is way more interesting than it sounds.
Yeah, it's true.
We're going to uncover how these rules that often seem like kind of boring, how they actually shape the world around us.
Yeah, what might seem like, just these kind of boring technicalities on a map actually influence so much of like how much your property's worth, what your neighborhood's even like.
Yeah, who knew?
Big stuff.
Right. And to think it all started with this legal case that honestly sounds like something ripped from the headlines today.
Oh, yeah.
Euclid v. Ambler Realty, like a showdown.
Dramatic.
Oh, went all the way to the Supreme Court back in 1926.
Wow.
So set the scene for us. What was the drama? Like, what was going on?
Okay, so picture this. It's the Roaring 20s. Cities are booming and everyone's like clamoring for space, right?
Yeah.
So we're in Euclid, Ohio, suburb of Cleveland, and we've got this like classic clash of interests. Ambler Realty, a company, they want to build an industrial park.
Okay.
So think factories, warehouses, maybe even a power plant.
Okay, so I'm already like sensing some tension brewing here. Where are they planning on building this?
Yeah, you already know.
Industrial powerhouse, yeah.
Right next to a developing residential area.
Oh, no.
Full of, as the legal documents so delicately put it, fancy houses.
Oh, boy. That's a recipe for some serious neighborhood drama right there.
Yeah.
So what was the legal issue at the heart of this whole battle royale?
Well, the big question was, did towns like Euclid, did they even have the power to, like, separate residential and industrial zones, in the name of public welfare? Could they actually tell a company like Ambler Realty, no, you can't build your factories here?
Right.
And the stakes were really high because, like, if Ambler Realty had won this thing, it could have, like, dramatically reshaped cities all over the U.S.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Imagine living next door to a factory today.
Right, exactly.
So who came out on top of this epic showdown?
So in a landmark decision, I mean, this is the big one, the Supreme Court actually sided with the village of Euclid.
Wow.
And upheld zoning laws as constitutional.
Huge.
Yeah, which is why to this day, you don't typically see factories just, like, popping up in the middle of quiet suburban neighborhoods.
Right.
It all goes back to this one case.
That is wild. That is incredible.
That's a big deal.
So this seemingly, like, mundane case, just like another day at the courthouse.
Yeah.
Actually set the stage for how our cities are organized, even now.
Right.
I mean, it makes you wonder, like, what were they trying to achieve with these early zoning laws? Was it really just about separating, like, those uncompatible uses, like factories and houses?
Well, that was a huge part of it, for sure. But there was also this goal of, like, shaping the character of communities.
Okay, tell me more about that, because it's not like they could predict the future of neighborhoods.
Right. Yeah.
So how did they envision zoning, like, actually shaping communities?
Well, they couldn't predict the future, but they could influence it, right?
Okay.
Because think about it. Zoning dictates what gets built. So by making these separate zones for residences, businesses, industries, they're essentially laying the groundwork for how cities would grow. It's like they were playing a giant game of city planning Tetris, trying to make all the pieces fit.
I like that analogy. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So they were trying to bring, like, order to the chaos of this rapidly, like, changing world.
Exactly. And as we'll see, while that desire for order did lead to some really positive outcomes,
Yeah.
it also created some unintended consequences that we're still dealing with today.
Okay, so we've talked about separating uses, but how does that, like, actually work in practice? Are there different types of zoning?
Yeah.
Is it, like, just one big no factories here kind of thing?
No, it actually gets really in the weeds, which, I guess is appropriate for zoning.
Yeah.
But, our trusty textbook here breaks it down into two main types: use zoning and area zoning.
Okay, let's unpack that. Use zoning versus area zoning. What's the difference?
So imagine, like, you're a city planner with a giant coloring book of the city map.
Okay.
With use zoning, you're basically assigning different colors for different purposes. Green for residential, blue for commercial, red for industrial. Like, you get the idea.
Yeah.
Each color, then, dictates what you can do on that piece of land.
So use zoning is like that master plan, like laying out the broad strokes of what goes where.
Totally.
It's why you don't see, like, a grocery store just plop down in the middle of a bunch of houses.
Exactly. And then area zoning is where we get into the finer details. Think of it as the city planner now grabbing a ruler, right, and setting some ground rules for what you can actually do within those colored zones. So area zoning covers things like how big a building can be, how high it can go, even how far back from the street it has to be built.
Oh, okay. So is that why my neighbor got, like, yelled at for building his prize-winning pumpkin patch too close to the sidewalk? Was that area zoning?
Area zoning. Yeah, those setbacks, as they're called. They're all about, like, creating a sense of space.
Right.
And, like, preventing buildings from crowding each other out.
Okay.
Which is also why you don't usually see, like, skyscrapers towering over cute little bungalows.
Makes sense.
Yeah, area zoning keeps things in check.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how all these rules, like, come together to shape a neighborhood. But it also seems like with all these rules, things could get a little inflexible, you know? Like, what happens when the rules change?
Yeah.
Or, like, maybe an old business doesn't fit the new zoning code anymore. Do they just have to pack up and leave?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. There's this thing called a nonconforming use.
Uh-huh.
And it's basically this provision for situations just like that.
Okay.
Like a zoning time capsule, if
Right.
you will. So if a property was already being used for a specific purpose before the zoning rules changed, they might be allowed to keep doing their thing, even if it no longer jives with the new regulations.
So it's like a grandfathered in clause for building.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, like that old bookstore that's been there since, your grandparents were kids. That's probably a non-conforming use.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. It's a way of, like, acknowledging that cities evolve, right?
Yeah.
But it also prevents those situations where a business that's been, like, a beloved part of the neighborhood for years suddenly gets pushed out because the rules changed.
Right. That makes sense. But I'm also imagining there are some pretty crazy cases where this zoning time capsule idea probably caused some major headaches for somebody.
Oh, for sure.
Like, what happens if a business wants to, like, completely change what they're doing? Could my grandparents' bookstore suddenly become a heavy metal nightclub and still be like, non-conforming use, we're grandfathered in?
Well, I mean, there are limits to how much you can change before it's no longer considered the same use. And the courts have had to weigh in on some pretty interesting cases about this. One that comes to mind is Belleville v. Perillos, a New Jersey case from back in the disco era.
A disco-themed legal battle. I am here for this. Tell me more.
Okay, so picture this. It's the late 1970s.
Okay.
And Perillos, this, like, old-school Italian restaurant, they decide to, get with the times.
Yeah.
They convert the place into a disco.
Oh, no.
Complete with a dance floor, psychedelic lights, a DJ, the whole shebang.
Oh, I bet the neighbors loved that.
Not so much.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the complaints start rolling in, the noise, the crowds, the late-night activity.
Right.
So the town takes Perillos to court.
Okay.
And their argument was that the restaurant, it had changed its use so drastically that it no longer qualified for that, like, non-conforming use protection.
So was Perillos allowed to, like, keep the disco ball spinning?
The court actually sided with the town.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They ruled that, like, going from quiet restaurant to booming disco was just too much of a change.
Okay.
Yeah, this case really highlighted that non-conforming uses, like, they're not a free pass to do whatever you want.
Right.
Like, there are limits to how much you can actually alter a business before it loses that grandfathered status.
Yeah, it's kind of like that saying, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
But this brings up a question for me, like, if zoning can be used to, prevent a disco from disrupting a neighborhood, couldn't it also be used in, like, less noble ways? Like, could it be used to keep certain types of people out of a community?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and it brings up a much more, like, serious side of zoning that's been at the heart of a lot of legal battles.
Yeah.
We're talking about exclusionary zoning.
Okay. Exclusionary zoning. I mean, it sounds exactly like what it is, excluding certain groups of people, but I'm guessing it's not as simple as just saying, no, you can't live here. How does that actually work?
You're right. It's definitely more subtle than that. Imagine, like, a town that only allows these large single-family homes.
Yeah, okay.
They got these minimum lot sizes that are, like, way bigger than what most families could afford.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
Right.
So by setting those kinds of zoning restrictions, they're basically, like, pricing out anyone who can't afford these massive homes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it can really impact the whole community. Like, think about it. If you don't have a good mix of housing options, you're limiting the diversity of who can even live there.
Right.
And it impacts everything, the local economy, the schools, everything.
Yeah, so it's not just about where people live, it's like limiting their opportunities.
Yeah.
It's almost like zoning by default, you know?
Yeah.
Has this kind of practice been challenged in court?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There have been tons of legal battles over this. One of the biggest ones, though, was the Mount Laurel case back in 1975, New Jersey.
Okay.
And this case basically said that towns can't use zoning to totally block affordable housing.
A landmark case in the fight for affordable housing. But I'm sure that, you know, the folks who supported exclusionary zoning, they had their reasons. What were their arguments?
A lot of it came down to property taxes and school funding.
Yeah.
So in a lot of the U.S. local schools, they rely heavily on property taxes.
Right.
So the thinking was, if you have more expensive homes, you've got a bigger tax base, which means more money for schools and stuff.
So it's like this self-perpetuating cycle. Towns want to attract higher income residents. So they make these zoning laws that only those residents can benefit from, which then drives up property values.
Exactly.
And then it just reinforces the zoning laws.
Exactly. And it creates a system that's really hard to change. But zoning isn't set in stone. It can be a tool for positive change too.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of change, we hear a lot about this idea of smart growth these days.
Yeah.
And how it's changing the way we think about urban planning. How does zoning fit into all of that?
So smart growth is all about creating these more sustainable communities. Think walkable neighborhoods, mixed-use development, less reliance on cars.
Right.
Zoning can actually encourage this. You could allow businesses and residences to be in the same area.
So instead of having to drive everywhere, you could live, work, shop, all within walking distance of your house.
Exactly.
I mean, I have to admit, that does sound kind of appealing.
It does. And it's not just about convenience. It's about creating that sense of community.
Yeah.
Reducing our environmental impact. It's promoting healthier lifestyles.
Yeah. Zoning as a force for good. I love that. It seems like there's this growing awareness that, zoning isn't just about what we don't want.
Right.
It's about what we do want, like affordable housing, sustainable communities, a real sense of place.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to actually be aware of these regulations,
Sure.
how they impact us.
Right.
Because zoning, it might seem kind of technical, bureaucratic, but at its heart, it's about the values we choose.
Yeah.
About the kind of world we want to create.
You've given us a lot to think about today. So for everyone listening out there who's now a deep dive expert on zoning, what's the key takeaway here?
Zoning, it's more than just lines on a map. It reflects our history, our values, our vision for the future. So next time you're walking around your neighborhood, take a look around. What kinds of buildings do you see? What businesses are there? Parks? How are the streets laid out? All of that was probably shaped by zoning decisions, some made decades ago.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that these rules, even if they seem kind of technical, can have a huge impact on us.
So true. And with that, we'll leave you with this thought. Zoning, it's an ongoing conversation. So stay informed, get involved in your community, and help shape the places you care about.